There you are.
Okay. Okay, we're back. We're going to go to the committee of the whole. We have 5 items. The first item, we're going to go out of order and have the technology update report from Marty Mulholland first. Go ahead, Marty.
Thank you very much, Council. Marty Mulholland, IT Director with the City, and I'm here to provide you with a 2015 update on many of the projects that are funded in the 2015 capital plan. Most of these items are listed in that section of the budget and are funded by the Technology Replacement and Reserve Fund. Oops, page up. Oops, I'm missing a page. So I'm going to go through this agenda by our different organizations in the IT department, and starting off with our Applications Division. Our Applications Division is responsible for maintaining and supporting a number of our complex business applications that are used by several city departments. Some examples include the core financials and the payroll and the billing systems, and our geographic information systems, which are our mapping systems. We'll run through 5 major projects that we're currently working on and have been working on. First, the Council may recall our discussions about our budget development software and the fact that our old system, which was called SRC, was not supported and hadn't been supported for a long time, and we were doing some handsprings to make it work. And so last year we selected a new budget development system and appropriated $160,000 for the purchase of that application. That software has been implemented, and from an IT perspective, it's been turned over to the Finance Department. I think Brian's in here today. They are training the different departments on its use. It'll be used for budget monitoring and analysis for the balance of this biennium for 15 and 16, and then we'll be using it to develop the 17-18 budget. So project complete from the standpoint of the IT department and the funds expended. Second thing I'd like to mention are our continuing expansion of GIS tools. Maybe the Council will recall the announcement of the CityIQ product last year. That's something that the public can use if they go to our website and search on CityIQ. They can get an awful lot of information about property and maps and information that the city collects. But we've also been partnering with our departments to work on improved programs internally. For example, a new GIS tool for our utility crews so that they can go out with an iPad and get access to detailed infrastructure information. And we've also been partnering with the departments to add additional mapping-based information to the public. And we've got a couple of examples that I'll just mention here. We have a capital projects map. We have a park finder. We have our public art collection. And we've just recently worked on the home fund locations are now on a new mapping application, and a self-guided historic tour. So those are some just brief updates of what's going on in the GIS world. Our GIS team helped us with this next project, the rental registration program. Council, you're clearly aware of this program. For us in IT, it was quite challenging, and we initially thought we would buy some software to manage that program, and that was really didn't work out. It was cost prohibitive. We didn't have a strong fit internally. So what we did for this initial registration period is to write the program ourselves, and our applications and GIS team worked together, and we had a broad multi-departmental effort working with legal and finance and planning to put that together. And as you all know, we had to go live on July 1st, and I believe that very first day we had 200 registrations, and most of them went through in the online application. And I've been asking for statistics on the percentage of the registrations that went through online versus via paper. And as of the 2-week point, about 67% of the registrations were online. We got a little bit of feedback from the public and actually managed to tweak the application to make it a little more user-friendly. And again, from an IT perspective, job done for the 2015 use of that. This next project, the permitting system, will actually house the rental registration in the long term, and I believe Planning Director Rick Sepler has mentioned that to you in the past. This is the most significant, single significant investment in the city's capital plan budget from an IT perspective. Council may recall we had an old permitting system called Tidemark. We've actually been using it for 24 years here at the city. Hasn't been updated or supported for years, and it was another situation where we were struggling to keep it going, and permitting and related processing is a vital function of the city. And so with your support, appropriated a significant investment in improved solutions for the city. This system, although we call it the permitting system, it'll do a lot more than permitting, and I won't read the slide to you, but a couple of key elements. It will include code enforcement and electronic plan review and many other related functions over time. It'll be used by over 100 employees in many departments, so this is a big project for us. It's a multi-year effort. Last year we selected the software, and we're now in implementation. And the staff is testing a new electronic plan review product. It's called Bluebeam. Fire had been using it, and as part of this project, we're going to be expanding that further internally so that permit applicants can submit an electronic plan rather than a paper plan, can be reviewed electronically, and those markups can be returned to the applicant electronically. Apparently that was a top request from the permitting applications input that had been received. So we're excited that that's moving forward. I asked the core team, we have about 10 people working on this project, and I said, what are you seeing right now as the value of this as we approach a November go live of the new permitting system? And here's what they said. They said, first of all, you've reduced the risk of having a system that nobody was supporting or improving. So that will be taken care of. They see improved accuracy. The new system has GIS integration, so when a new permit application comes in, it provides a number of alerts, say related to critical areas on a property, and that's all sitting right there in front of the staff member as they process that intake for a permit. The electronic plan review is much more efficient for us and for our customers. The iPads that we'll be providing to our inspectors and our code enforcement officers will give them access to the information they need while they're out in the field. It's got more automated reminders and checklists for sometimes complex permitting processes. Today they have to run a series of reports to figure out what decisions they have to make. And it's allowing us to incorporate our lean best practices for improved process efficiency over time. The current effort right now is we're gearing up for this November go live, and it's an intense testing effort, and we're testing the conversion of 24 years of permitting history and making sure it's right. We'll be running through that conversion and testing 3 times between now and November. So it's a very big effort, and we're very excited about it, and we are within the budget at this time. So I'll move on to the next project. Not seeing questions. Another project that's quite visible to the community is our website. This project is not a complete overhaul of the website in that we're maintaining some of the key content areas in the overall organization structure. However, we're going to new tools, and we had a couple of goals that were very important, including improved use on mobile devices. In looking at statistics of our website today, is looking at the first half of 2015, 26% of our website traffic is coming from smartphones, and another 7% from iPads or other types of tablets. And our current site really doesn't work very well in those environments. So we really wanted to, I see some of you nodding, we really wanted to improve that, and we will be. We had some content areas that we wanted to enhance, and we wanted it to be easier for our departments to edit their content and provide an updated design. We've been collaborating with representatives from all departments. We have a web department group, and we've also been collaborating with Vanessa Blackburn, who's in the audience, and she has been assisting as we got input on the design and feedback. She was the decider. So I'm going to just point out a few things quickly. When you look at the website on a desktop computer, you'll see this upper half, and you can't see it. There's a kind of a subtle gray line here where you can scroll down and get quick access to a number of key content areas. And in these primary navigation buttons that have been added here, contacts, maps, and payments, those are heavily used aspects of our current site, and then you can scroll down and quickly get to other key content. That'll be available on the desktop version. And I've got a few more screenshots to show you. This left-hand photo is what you might see. These are design concepts, not necessarily finalized, but let's say you're looking at transportation planning, transportation planning. You can see a nice image for that service, quick information, and if you scroll down, again on a smartphone, quick access to other contacts and links. This other screenshot is a design concept for the police department. Police really wanted to enhance their content areas as well. And you can see that they can add some extra navigation to allow the public to get to the content that police wants to make more accessible. And much stronger use of large images and photos as we go along. So the target for this project is fall. We don't have an exact date, and we are on budget for this effort at this time. Okay. Moving on, a couple of other projects that I'll mention briefly that are upcoming. Those of you on the council might recall the budget discussions about a consultant study related to our financial systems. We are just getting started with this. This is one that I would have ideally liked to start a little bit earlier, but we are just getting going. And so I anticipate returning to the council at some point in the future, and I don't have exact timing on this. But what we're looking to do is come up with a roadmap for our core financial system. And that may be a significant investment in the future to replace, if we do proceed with a replacement. Right now we're talking to other cities as the economy has turned around. Other cities are tackling financial systems, and we're trying to look at perhaps a consultant study to say, how should we approach this? We've been really struggling with our core financial, and we've been buying a bunch of side systems and keeping them all talking together. It's been quite a challenge, and I know it is one of our top priorities for our finance department, Brian Henshaw, but we're just getting going in that area at this time. And then one final project related to applications has to do with the legislative systems. You may recall that we bought a system to automate our council agenda bills and the publication of these meetings right here, and provide video links to that. That software is going through a complete rewrite, and the date will be available in the next coming months, but we don't quite have a timing for when we will adopt that new tool. So that will have us redoing our use of agenda management internally, and it will also then have us migrate all of the agenda history that we've published in this new system since 2014 into the new system. And then we have to go to our even older legislative history that is sitting in Lotus Notes and find a home for that. So this is just a heads up for you that we haven't quite seen the end of our legislative history project efforts. Network infrastructure, I don't have very many pictures. These are the devices that you don't see, but they make our network and computer systems run, and they're essential to every other element of our technology. And in the 2015 plan, you had $260,000 appropriated for this. We are on track and have completed a City Hall core switch replacement. We've purchased a switch for the data center, a more expensive device, cost about $107,000. Planning to cut over to that in September. And then the access switches are the devices that the computers all plug into in every single building and really are the baseline for all of our technology infrastructure. We are on track and on budget at this point and have had thus far no unplanned downtime, which is the goal when you update your network infrastructure. Our technical service division is largely tasked with more program area work. There are a couple projects I mentioned. We are largely complete with the 2015 computer replacements. We're staying in touch with Microsoft as we manage this cloud-based environment. It's constantly changing. And we process service requests from all of our departments, and they get email as they request technical services from us. We process about 10,000 of those every year. So that's kind of their program effort. We're partnering with Public Works and with our Network Ops team to get ready for the move to the federal building, which is currently being remodeled. And finally, and the reason you didn't get these slides today is that I took these photos last week because it was just so fun. I had to share them with you. Last week, we replaced the audio-video systems in the court, and it does not look like this now. But many of you may recall we really reached a point where the audio-video was so old that the court was struggling to maintain audio records, which is required of us for our court. And we have $100,000 appropriated to replace those systems, which includes both courtrooms. The vast majority of the equipment is sitting in this rack right here, and here's a technician from the company setting that up. I was really impressed with the court clerk who came into this room on Wednesday morning and had to learn how to use new software, and Wednesday afternoon used the new software during a hearing. And then we completed the same process for the upstairs courtroom and began using it for 2 hearings on Friday, or 2 sessions of cases. I don't have my terminology right. We're really pleased with the quality of the sound and the recording. Probably going to add a few more speakers to the room. This project is slightly over budget. I think it'll be at about 103. We've got some contingency money identified in the Tech Reserve Fund for just such needs. We've got to add a few more speakers. I want to mention one other thing that you might find interesting. You'll see this large monitor in the courtroom, and there is one in the upstairs courtroom as well. That's for the next phase of this project. One of our goals was to enable our court staff to conduct hearings with inmates at the jail. And so this is essentially a video conferencing capability that will allow our staff to remain here and the defendants at the jail go to a specified room. That's our next phase. We are waiting on the county. They are going through an update of their systems, and once they've completed that, we will have that in place. And that was another goal of our court when we put this new system together. And finally, this is my last slide. Just wanted to describe our television services for the year. I won't read it to you, but what you'll see is a strong showing of new programming and continued programming. We're continuing to get requests from lots of departments, which shows us that people are wanting to use BTV10 as a way of communicating with the public. I've got several examples here. I'm mentioning one that I thought was particularly fun, which is a video invite to the christening of the Salish Star with really cool video photos of the new fireboat. So that is on our YouTube channel and running on BTV10. From an infrastructure standpoint, we just recently completed this process, which is to replace the fiber optic equipment between this room and BTV10. It had never been replaced before, so it had been there since, I think, about 2000. And really proud of Dale and DJ for being able to do that without any consulting or engineering resources. And we're using it now, so I hope it's all working to capture the images. And finally, we're doing a public access pilot. That is an option for members of the public to submit programming and air that on Sundays on Access Bellingham, also on Channel 10. The first training session was completed. We got, I think, very positive feedback. And the equipment use is going quite well, and we've updated the forms and tweaked that. And I anticipate returning to you possibly with Brian Heinrich with more complete program update, but wanted to let you know that the first session was completed and the second one is starting up. So thank you very much for your time today. I know you have a lot going on. Not seeing any questions, I'll let you move on to the next item.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to our next item, which is a 2015 state legislative briefing. Mayor Linville, you want to introduce this?
I'm looking back there. I expected to see Tom. Someone was talking about Tom, but Tom's not here. So, as you know, this is one of our lobbyists in Olympia, Ben Buchholz, and he's here to give us the update. Personally, considering how tough the session was, I was quite pleased with some of the things that happened. And I think many times citizens think, well, if the city has a lobbyist, shouldn't that person take the list of what we want and go down there and get it? And the truth is, of course they should. However, having a bit of experience down there, I have to tell you that at least 50% of the time, our lobbyists are playing defense and talking about how legislation will affect the city of Bellingham and the port and the county, and also keeping their ear to the ground about new things that might pop up. And you don't get that kind of information unless you actually have someone down there dedicated. And we had Dick Little for a very long time, and I think Ben and Tom have done an excellent job, and I continually get compliments about them from other legislators. I just got one on last Thursday before you got there, from Jeff Morris. So I'm very pleased with what they've done, and I'll let Ben talk to you about it, especially the things that were on our agenda that we care about. And if you could get us AIS money, that would be really nice too, Ben.
Michael and I were just talking about that, so we'll see what we can do. It's a good thing I'm not 7 feet tall. This mic would be really awkward. Thanks for having me today. My name is Ben Buchholz. I work with Tom McBride down in Olympia, representing you. Tom couldn't make it today. He had an appointment he's been trying to get into for 6 months since session ran a little bit long, and it was moved up to this afternoon, so he apologizes for not being here. He looks forward to seeing you next time, hopefully. I will start by saying, if you have religiously been reading our weekly legislative update, which I know at some points gets up to 70 pages, some of this will sound familiar. Some of it will be new, since the first week of July was the finishing of session, so the third special session. So some of it will be brand new to you. I think you already got the final report also, so most of it was in there. I will say, if there's one thing you take away from this session, it would have to be that the most vulnerable people in the city of Bellingham had a very good session. And I think that's something that, no matter what district you represent or what income level you come from, that is something we all should be working towards. And the legislature did an excellent job for those folks this year. Also, a big kudos out to your delegation that represents you in Olympia. They fought hard for the most important priority issues for Whatcom County, the district, and for the city. Did a fantastic job. They do a great job listening when Tom and I come in to their offices, which when you're in your third special session, you're starting to get tired of hearing from people like us. So a big thanks to them. I will start off just in less than a minute. I'll give you an update on basically what the legislature was trying to do during session, and then I will dive right into the legislative objectives and the priority issues that we worked on during session. The big takeaway is they were writing an operating budget for the next 2 years, and that was scheduled to go 105 days during the regular session. I've been lobbying in Olympia about 10 years now, and I can officially say that I witnessed the longest legislative session in the history of the state of Washington, 176 days. 1 regular session, 3 special sessions, and even a few extra days that I don't think anybody had planned on being there after July 1st. So a very long session. Goal was to get the operating budget written. There were some differing opinions in the House and the Senate. Senate, as you know, is led by the majority is the Republican Party there. They have about 3 additional seats than the Democrats. In the House, it's controlled by 4 seats by the Democrats. So obviously there are going to be some opposing opinions on how to get to the final operating budget and how it should be written. The House believed that there needed to be about $1.5 billion new tax increases to pay for, like I said earlier, some of the mental health funding and social services. As it turned out, the farther it went into session, it became pretty apparent that Revenues were even higher than had been forecast previously last year and the quarters before session started. In March came the final decision that there probably wasn't going to need to be as much revenue when the forecast came in. Revenue collections had gone up by about $350 million, and so that helped narrow the gap between the House and the Senate proposals. In the end, what passed was $38.2 billion. That's $4.4 billion more than the last biennium. So whatever that is, about 12% spending increase for the next 2 years. That included some tax breaks, tax preferences, I guess would be the correct term, were closed for certain businesses. Microsoft took one of the largest hits, which was about $75 million. And it also extended about $36 million worth of tax preferences for certain businesses. With having said that, that'll be the preface to the first two excellent things that happened for economic stimulus here in the area. First being one of the priorities on the legislative objective was the marine tourism bill. That would extend from 60 days to 180 days that a non-resident entity-owned vessel, boat, up to 164 feet can have a longer stay so that they can enjoy Bellingham. They can have their boat worked on, motor work, hull work. And that was, to be honest with you, as we've, I think, said before, that was going to be a very heavy lift to get that bill done. Just because the Department of Revenue was opposed to it. They don't know exactly how much it's going to be in revenue, but it got done. And, you know, great work on the coalition's part for getting the marine tourism bill passed. The mayor did an excellent job. Several council members were in town and spoke about the bill with the delegation. Excellent work by you guys, and just a continued conversation throughout 176 days of session to show just how important of a stimulus this could be for the city of Bellingham and waterfront businesses that do a lot of the work on these large boats. The second part that was included in some of the tax preferences that were extended out to 2027, the aluminum smelters preferential rate was extended to 2027. That will be good for the business located near here. And again, very fortunate to be included in a very small amount that were extended, like I said, about $36 million over the next 2 years. I'll dive right into the second piece that legislators were working on this session, and that was a transportation revenue package. I'm sure most of you are up to date on how that ended. It was passed successfully, even though there were some very early morning, 6 a.m. Events, shenanigans maybe would be a good word to use in the Senate. And that vote was delayed. A couple pieces of the bill didn't quite make it the way it was supposed to. And so they came back a week later and got it done. That transportation revenue package is $16.1 billion over 16 years, raises the gas tax by 11.9 cents per gallon. And you can do the simple math. If you drive, 35,000 miles like I do a year, then it'll cost you about, 80, 90 bucks, something like that. So it's pretty reasonable considering what the city received. Orchard Street Connector, that's a $10 million project. That was in the transportation package. The Iowa Street Interchange, $22.5 million. Slater Road Interchange, $21.2 million. Bakerview, off the first few years, is about $10 million in the revenue package. And then Guide Meridian Pedestrian Overpass, $3 million. And then Michael asked me to touch just briefly on the safe routes to school, bike paths, and pedestrian walkways. The exact number I don't have. I can get that and send it to you. It is included in the transportation revenue package, but this is where it gets really tricky. As most of you have been reading in the Bellingham Herald, the governor currently is dealing with a decision that he made a couple weeks before the package was passed, that it would include a low carbon fuel standard poison pill, and basically would say that he wouldn't sign by executive order a low carbon fuel standard until 2023. As you've been reading in the papers, you know as much as I do, he hasn't made a decision, but it looks like he's considering swallowing that poison pill and voiding a lot of the bike path and pedestrian walkway parts of the transportation package. So to answer your question, Michael, it's in there right now, but it may not be. I can say that I'm a member of the Cascade Bicycle Club, and I get their email update, and it has a very broad coalition built around it now to make sure that he doesn't do an executive order on low carbon fuel standards. That doesn't mean he won't, because it's his decision. He has to make that decision. The mayor has voiced the city's opinion on the mayor's opinion on what he should do. And he's hearing from a lot of different coalitions, like I said, but that doesn't mean that this money is going to stay there. So just so that you know, I wanted to put the asterisk next to that. Moving on to the capital budget, very quickly, I want to leave plenty of time for your questions. The federal building rehab project got into the capital budget about $920,000. A $3 million remedial action grant made it into the capital budget. R.G. Haley, about $1.2 million for that project. And then, since it's a very close entity, the port cleanup, several cleanups there, got about $10 million in grants. And then a good piece of work was done on the Carver renovation. That made it into the capital budget, $64 million for that project. So getting into the legislative objectives, and I think somebody told me this was in your packet, so maybe you can follow along, I don't know. Infrastructure investments, MACA, local toxics account. There was $1.5 million for the waterfront cleanup project in the local toxics account in the capital budget. And then statewide remedial action grants will total about $65 million. And stormwater cleanup projects will total about $53 million. So that was money that is in different locations, different accounts. A lot of it was funded through the capital budget. I already touched on the marine tourism bill. And then community and economic development initiatives. Like I said, a couple good ones for us will be the marine tourism bill and the aluminum smelters tax exemption, tax preference. And then AIS, I want to talk about aquatic invasive species just for a second. There was $1 million in the budget that is sent to Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Wildlife. That money, as I promised Michael earlier, because it was very much part of your conversation earlier, we will talk to Fish and Wildlife and see what the plan is with that $1 million, where it's going and how they plan on spending it. There's also $300,000 to study the voluntary participation in the AIS program. So the way I read that before I came here today was that study would then be reported back to the legislature within a year. So it sounds like that money is specifically tagged for that study. So, but it sounds like there are some conversations we can have with Fish and Wildlife to see if we can get some of that money up here. The liquor tax revenue was doubled this year, so this session. So instead of $25 million per year, it'll be now $50 million. That is shared, obviously, among cities, but it's at least a step in the right direction. And again, that was a long conversation where I was very grateful that our delegation helped and legislators were willing to listen to us. So, and then marijuana sales, House Bill 2136 was passed this year. In the first year, it's $15 million for cities to share. Not a huge amount, but when they've booked about $367 million for total marijuana revenue, it's a decent starting place. Following the first year, it'll go up to $20 million a year to be shared.
And they harmonized the laws.
That's right, yeah. So it was basically a package of 3 or 4 bills, and it will make the transactions much smoother, I'll just leave it at that, between recreational and medicinal, and there's plenty of opinions about that, but it was a package of bills that is supposed to smooth and streamline the tax sharing. And then the last 2 pieces, one that I probably won't do justice, but like I said earlier, for the social services and housing funding, there was a $100 million increase to mental health funding. And I tried this morning to calculate what exactly that number would be with total mental health spending in the state. And I wasn't going to do it justice, so I gave up on it. But it's a large amount of spending, and $100 million is a very good increase to that amount. There was also $75 million in the capital budget for the Housing Trust Fund, and an additional $15 million in the capital budget for owners, low-income owners of homes to have seals redone, like on windows and have roofs redone. Yep. Yeah, weatherization, that's good. So about an additional $90 million in the capital budget for that. And then the final piece that was on the legislative objective was rail safety. Oil by rail started out as a very broad bill, and what ended up passing is a good bill. It was, I would say, it was a piece of work that had to keep, evolving throughout session. What was passed basically will increase the fee on gross intrastate operating revenues by the railroads from 1.5% to 2.5%. And I believe, I'll have to check the number and get it to you guys, but that money is then spent for either spill cleanups or in preparation if there were to be a spill. How do we spend that money, and how do we make sure that the spill is contained? So, and the one last thing I wanted to mention, the warrant officer bill, which was on, I believe it was sort of a more detailed legislative objectives by the council. That bill passed April 24th. So there was some concern halfway through session that wasn't going to make it. Chief Cook came down, did an excellent job meeting with members of the committees, public safety committees, and basically painting a picture for them of why we need to be able to create the position of a warrant officer. And that bill passed, so good job by the chief. So I think I'll leave it at that. Okay. I want to be respectful of your time, and if there's questions, I will try to do my best.
We're going to keep it brief because we have 2 more long items on our agenda, so any questions? Go ahead, Michael.
Not a question. First of all, Ben, very thorough report. Thank you. And thank you for talking about aquatic invasive species. This goes back to what Jack was talking about. I don't think we're ever going to get full cost recovery with a fee system. However, if there's a statewide program and support from the state, I think that is the way we prevent general subsidies from the city for boating. So that's why I think that piece is really important, and I hope that Ben can take that story to Fish and Wildlife.
Okay, any other questions? Jack?
With the liquor and the marijuana payments, this is probably not for you, Ben, but how much will that really impact on the city budget? What's the approximate value? We don't know? Okay.
Drink up, folks.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Ben, on behalf of the council, thank you and Tom for what you. This is one of the most successful legislative sessions in a long time. Thank you, sir. Okay. Now we will go to our next item, which is a resolution requesting amendments to the Whatcom County Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. Mayor Linville. This is not roll call, dear.
What did you say?
I said, it's not roll call, dear. I'm calling on you to make the presentation.
You mean I or
Yes,
present
you.
is not? Okay. So in your packet, 199, I'm sorry, I was listening to Ben and didn't turn my, not in your packet. Okay, in your packet, Brian, do you want to come up here, please? There is a copy of a resolution that I forwarded to the county, just my ideas, because it was a short time frame. I did leave you all a message on Friday, and basically, the reason I just sent it from me is because I didn't think there had been a lot of feedback, and people were saying they'd like to discuss it, which I absolutely agree on. And so the county council had a copy to read into their packet, and unbeknownst to me, it was supposed to be just reading it in. That's what I was assured, though the county executive can't assure what the council will do, just like I can't assure what you will do. So that it ended up being a debate on Monday based on something that was supposed to be debated, but probably not without some more input from you guys and from everybody about what they thought. The objective of this was basically to require the task force to do certain things and require the county council to do certain things prior to any jail opening. And that had to do with all the diversions, alternatives, and that type of thing within the money that would, based on passage of the sales tax and based on the first 3 years of collecting dollars that were going to be just set aside. The main concern that I've had from the beginning is losing the city's capacity to pay for the kinds of diversions, prevention, and alternatives that we might want to pay for based on the fact that 0.2% is going to build and operate a new jail. And so if the city, in my opinion, if the city didn't have that 0.1% to spend on alternatives and diversion, then this was an attempt to direct the county to spend the way that we have talked about, trying to prevent the overcrowding in the jail by diverting people out of it and also preventing people from going to begin with. So that was the point of this. It was just one more attempt to see if there would be some agreement that diversion and prevention should be part of the overall discussion. And it wasn't met with a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings. I did have a talk with Red for quite a while before the meeting that Tuesday, and he said that there were certain changes he was going to make. And I said, this is yours now. This isn't mine, so you can do whatever you want with it. They did leave some dates in there that I thought were important, like coming up with the list of alternatives to implement by November 2016 instead of whenever the jail opens and things like that. So I thought that was a positive step. But the part in there that still is a little bit of the poison pill for me is that any alternatives potentially would then be at the expense of the cities. And one of the problems with this funding mechanism is the city is not going to have that capacity that they would have had in order to do those because we have to pay bed costs. We're going to get a rebate back, but it's not going to cover our bed costs. So this thing has gotten very complicated. I know it makes Roxanne's eyes roll when I talk about this, but I'm kind of in the old legislative mode. Is sometimes you don't settle something until sine die, which is the last day of session. So I am used to continuing to try to problem solve until the last dog dies, whenever that would be. And it wasn't dead yet, so I made an effort. But this is only my ideas, and I think Brian can go into more details about what's in and why and what the county council did. And they did pass it out of committee, or well, you can say what they did with.
Carl's sitting right there, he can tell us.
Carl can say what they did. Hi, Carl. So it did pass out with Rudd's amendment, which still doesn't solve the problem that I thought we needed to solve. Is that, am I accurate, Carl? Yep.
Go ahead, Brian.
Brian Heinrich, Mayor's Office. So I apologize for the overhead. It doesn't come across very well. What the mayor sent over to the county was some red line amendments to their ordinance, which created the task force. And just quickly, handful were somewhat minor on the first page, added capital and operating funds, struck net
I might want to put that in context.
I'm sorry, in the various whereases. So, one of the whereases is that the county has the financial capacity and is committed to providing the capital and operating funds necessary. Their original version just had capital. Moving down to the whereas that begins, the county currently owns. They contemplate the sale of that facility. We struck net from that so that the full value and proceeds from the transaction can be applied to a new facility. And just by way of reminder, these were accepted. Again, in the mayor's version that she sent over, struck that the interim facility would be expanded, either new or expanded parallel to the construction of a new county-wide jail facility. That sentence was struck with the intent that the new facility or expansion of the facility would not be dependent upon a new facility being built. Now going down into the ordained section, the mayor added number 6 to provide, her original words were direction. Councilmember Brown amended it to say recommendations to the county, or I'm sorry, just recommendations, so struck direction. Otherwise, that was accepted as submitted. And then further on down toward the bottom of the page, that the mayor proposed that all the alternatives that we considered would be provided without cost to the signatory cities of the jail facility use agreement authorized by Whatcom County Council earlier this month. That recognized that there was a new agreement that the county adopted on July 7th, and that we wanted to reference that, make sure we were correct there. And then I think this, to the mayor's point, I think is probably the most significant changes. And again, I apologize, it's hard to see the changes.
We've got them up here.
Do you have them?
We
Great.
can see them.
Thank you. So the intent was to immediately expand, and they changed it to expand as soon as reasonably possible. Those available alternatives, as determined appropriate by the task force, that was struck, to recommended by the task force. And then I think moving on down, this would be probably the most significant change is the last part. Any new agreement shall include formulas whereby the signatory cities shall reimburse the county. That was in, I think, direct conflict with the intent, which is that these services, these alternatives would be provided at no cost. That the jail facility use agreement, the subsequent tax dollars that would be raised, would be able to accommodate those alternatives as recommended.
Okay. Everybody had a chance to read through this. Any comments? Michael?
I guess I have a question for Kelly. Are you still interested in the council considering this city resolution, seeing as how the county has, in a certain sense, already replied to the requests that are in here? Is this kind of moot at this point?
Well, there are still things in there that I think are valuable, but they are not tied to signing the jail use agreement. So if there's things in there that, regardless, there's going to be a task force that's going to come up with alternatives. If we think that maybe we'd like those to start earlier rather than later, there's no harm in considering this. What what it isn't now, what I'd first thought is if we thought this was okay, then there might be 4 people who would want to vote for the jail agreement. They've changed it so that's not, they're not tied together anymore. And as far as I know, they're still going to discuss this at their, what meeting, Carl?
August 4th.
Yeah. They're going to be discussing this next Tuesday. So if there's things about this independently, what the task force does and how the alternatives come forward that the council is interested in, I don't think there's any reason to not discuss it or not say this makes sense. Carl, do you want to come down here?
Well,
I keep looking at you.
as I'm reading it, there are 4 things that are resolved at the end, and 2 of those the county has already responded to. That the county will operate and expand interim. They responded with the language no later than the opening of the new. With regard to the immediate alternatives, they've already responded with the language as soon as reasonably possible. The 4th item to who they would appoint the task force, I don't think is in debate. The only really operative part of this resolution right now is section 1, which is the part I'm having a hard time understanding what we're requesting and whether or not the county has replied to it. What we would be requesting, if the council endorsed your suggestion, Kelly, is that the ordinance establishing the financing of alternatives and diversion programs first be allocated from existing local funding sources and all other voter-approved tax revenue as allowed by law, as well as any state, federal, or private funding that will alleviate costs to all users of the proposed countywide jail facility. It's a long sentence, and I can't tell whether or not they've replied to that, and I can't tell whether or not they've agreed to that in principle.
Well, let me tell you what I think, and then Carl was there, so I wasn't there. From my discussion with Rudd, my concept was if we pass this new 0.2% and we have all the other revenues that have come forward, that will be the pot of money by which we'll pay for the alternatives, whatever, and we won't get an additional charge for alternatives. That was my request. And I think Rudd's amendment basically says that the county will take care of the felons, and their misdemeanors. But if the city has misdemeanors that are going to be covered by the alternatives, that there will be a fee charged to the cities for that. Is that correct, Carl? He said yes.
Yes. Oh, it was a little more complicated than that because the original version that came from the city didn't have the word existing revenue in it. And during the day, last Tuesday, the word existing got inserted in there because there was concern that the way it was written, it was like open up your pocketbooks, county, you're going to pay for anything the city wants. But by inserting existing, many of us thought the problem had been taken care of. And I should put the caveat in there, I'm speaking as the minority member because this passed on a 4-2 vote, and Mr. Buchanan and I voted against this.
Okay, Council, we're not going to spend all afternoon on it. We have another item, people in the audience. So you want to discuss this more tonight, or go ahead, Michael?
Well, I just wanted to say that I received some data, some information from Mr. Weimer that the county council has been asking for information on jail use. That has been tracked for the 6 months out of the year. The average use in the jail is around 340. You never want to run a jail full, so that means you need a jail that's really more like 390. Adding an increase in the size of the jail anticipated, based on the current usage numbers, the county may only need a jail that's 448 beds. That's with a safety factor of 85% full and with an anticipated increase. So I think there remains questions on the size of the jail. I mean, I think none of the elements of the jail proposal are really locked in place.
Well, we know the ballot is, so it's going on the ballot one way or another. Terry?
Yeah, with this, I'm just kind of rather confused with this because, one, I want to continue the dialogue and negotiation. I'm not opposed to doing that. I want to do that because I know we need a new jail and things. But, the mixed signals, I guess, Kelly, you'd gotten from the executive, oh, yes, send stuff. But from what I see from this, it's really not, it's take it or leave it. And I've already voted once on the other, and I don't see anything now that makes me change my mind. I'm willing to sit down as I was before to try to work out something that works for all of us. But when it's just presented and said, take it or leave it, well, it doesn't leave me anywhere to go with that.
Well,
and
and
so when people are willing to sit down and talk reasonable about some changes, I'm willing to sit down and negotiate.
Well, and
vote.
I separated out what the task force is doing, that they're going to do anyway, and what the jail agreement is. Right now, I have not seen on the part of the county executive or a majority of the council any willingness to talk about the jail agreement anymore. I think Carl can confirm
Go
that.
ahead. Go ahead,
So
Carl.
this is something different. This has nothing to do with the jail agreement. This
Go ahead.
has to
Yeah, I
do
know.
with the alternatives and what work the task force is doing.
Go ahead, Carl.
And just a little context to Terry's point is, I don't think this is a take it or leave it. This came to us, midday Tuesday. We didn't get to it until 11 o'clock p.m., I think,
Okay.
on Tuesday night. At that point, the county executive had no staff in the room. There was no one from the city of Bellingham in the room. So the council, on the fly, Mr. Brown, started making these amendments because of concerns, and we had to have something done to introduce, or we couldn't talk about it at our next meeting, and that would be the last meeting for 6 weeks. So this is what came out of a rushed process late in the
I know.
evening with nobody there to actually have the discussion.
And we
Carl,
got it like that as well on our computer, so we couldn't discuss.
what is
And the concern was it was just supposed to be read in like it was, and then you could discuss it and amend it on the 4th, and it developed a life of its own.
so the 4th is the last time you'll be talking about this?
Yeah, it's our meeting before
That's
we
it.
go on to a recess, and
So
we don't come
that's-
back until almost mid-September.
This is it. Okay, Pinky?
I just wanted to make a comment. I just wanted to thank you, Mayor, for being willing to try and make a difference, because I think if we could have immediately helped people who are having mental illness and chemical dependencies, we could have made a difference right away. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for taking these steps, and thank you.
Okay, I don't see any further action. Thank you, Carl, for coming. I have to admit, I stayed up. I watched that meeting from 7 to 11:30, and I couldn't believe I watched that at all. But you sat through it. It was pretty grueling. We've been there before, too. Jack, you want to say something? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Now, the final item, patiently waiting, is Mr. Alan Mariner. Alan Mariner and Company. Which one is it? Computers. Oh, that's flow to. Yeah.
Full screen.
Yeah, perfect.
Display show, yeah. I don't know why it's not doing it. I'm gonna have to shut the whole thing down and start over, I think.
Technical difficulties.
Start while you, and then I'll restart this.
Can you do it without it, Alan, just for the sake of time? I think we're all pretty well aware of this. Maybe you could use that.
It will in a minute. I shut it down.
Well, they do.
And so now,
1 second, we'll get started, Gene.
1 sec, 1,001, that's it. Don't ever whip those numbers out, Alan. I can count a little bit.
Oh, there we go. I want to show.
We have an executive session coming up. I have a basket.
Sorry about this. It was just working.
I know.
There we go.
Okay,
we're
thanks
ready.
for your patience, folks. Go ahead, Alan.
Yes, Alan Mariner, Deputy City Attorney. With me today are the cities, on the city's negotiating team with Kitech are Rick Sepler, Kathy Bell, and Ted Carlson. Kitech representatives, Bob Carmichael, their attorney, Nayuki Ishii, and Darcy Jones, their engineering consultant. We briefed council on June 15th on our negotiations with Kitech on a variety of issues related to their E8, E9 subdivision, which is, I want to emphasize, is located within the city in the north part of the Cordata PUD. And it is this area outlined in red. That's the E89 subdivision. This 428-unit subdivision, the issues that we were negotiating on included identifying the east-west connector from the Guide Meridian to Northwest Avenue. The issue is whether it should continue to be Klein Road, which would be, you can see Klein Road is not obviously fully constructed, but would be from the Guide all the way over to Northwest Avenue. Or whether it should be switched to Horton Road from the Guide over to Northwest Avenue. Also, another issue was dealing with a pending building moratorium in the area where the subdivision was located in the northern part of the PUD, which would have impacted the construction of the subdivision. Also, calculating Kitech's financial contribution to the necessary transportation improvements for the entire Cordata PUD. And finally, considering Kitech's request to modify their phasing for the construction of the subdivision. And we have reached a tentative, comprehensive agreement that deals with all of these interrelated issues, and it's subject to City Council's review and approval. Our agreement identifies Horton Road instead of Klein Road as the east-west connector called out in the PUD documents. It allows Kitech to avoid the pending building moratorium for their subdivision that's just around the corner. It allows them to modify their phasing plan to better suit the market conditions as far as constructing the subdivision. And finally, and important for the city, it requires the Kitech pay $1.5 million towards the necessary transportation improvements that are required for the Cordata PUD. And that $1.5 million is a negotiated amount based on analysis from both Kitech representatives and city staff as far as their proportionate share of the necessary improvements for the Cordata PUD. And if you have any questions about that number, Ted Carlson can explain how we got there. So this afternoon, just briefly, we're seeking direction from council to proceed with a public hearing where you will consider a development agreement that reflects this tentative comprehensive agreement reached by the Kitech and city representatives. And with that,
Okay.
City staff is here to answer any questions, so is our KITEX
Okay,
staff.
thank you, Alan. Michael?
If the request is simply to provide direction to schedule a public hearing, then I would move that we schedule a public
More
hearing.
than that.
Second.
Second?
Is that what you're asking for, Alan?
That's what we're asking for. The actual consideration will occur. We don't want to go through, there's a
No.
lot of work that's going to go through in drafting, Bob Carmichael and I drafting the development agreement. We want to make sure we're headed down the right road.
Yep.
Staff feels very good about it. I think
Good.
KITEC representatives do too, but we don't want to go down that road unless council says yes.
Okay, any further discussion, Jack?
I guess I had one question, Alan. You're mentioning that there is an obligation to the PUD financially. Is there also is that in addition to the obligation of building Klein Road?
Well, the requirement to build Klein Road will probably change somewhat in that we're changing the main east-west connector from Klein Road to Horton. So there will be a requirement because the Klein Road runs right through the middle of the subdivision, but to what standard it will be built to will probably change based on the change in where the connector is. There's also, for this portion of Klein Road, right between the guide and the edge of the subdivision, there is no plan, and Ted could comment on that, there is no financially reasonable plan to construct that segment.
Right. So I guess the question is that under the existing regulations that we have for this particular project, is there an obligation? Well, there's an obligation to go and build Klein Road. I understand that.
Abutting their subdivision.
Abutting their subdivision. In addition to that, is there an obligation to the PUD to go and help pay into the PUD?
The $1.5 million will deal with all of KITEC's potential transportation obligations to the PUD and to avoid the potential moratorium. So it's a package deal. So there wouldn't be an additional obligation to further pay for Cordata transportation improvements.
Okay, so if we did not have an agreement, there still would be 1.5 that would go into the PUD fund?
If we didn't have agreement, we wouldn't receive the $1.5 million.
Well, what would we receive as far as the PUD obligation from that?
That's why we were negotiating. It was really unclear the impact of the moratorium, who pays for the necessary transportation improvements. So KITEC has stepped up and said, we can pay what we think is our share, and the city agrees, of $1.5 million. That by no means pays for all it's a fraction of all the improvements that we were looking at, the total cost.
Okay, I'm just trying.
I'm
trying to get an apples to apples of what is existing and what the obligations are to what this proposal is.
I would also want to say, Ted, do you have anything you would add to that?
Okay. Okay, the motion is to proceed to a public hearing on a development agreement memorializing this agreement. All those in favor will say aye. 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 All those opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Alan. We're now going to go into executive session. We have two items: potential litigation, approximately 15 minutes. Litigation update, approximately 5 minutes. We should be out of executive session at about 4:30. We already did that.